Welcome to this edition of Defense Forum, a forum which gives you the best of defense, strategy, and technology. In today's edition, we are going to touch upon a very vital aspect of the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, the conduct of mechanized operations within it by both sides. To help unravel how mechanized operations were conducted there, what were its lessons, we have with us two luminaries of the fight. Lieutenant General R.K. Jagga, who retired as the Director General of India's Mechanized Forces, Maj Gen Jagatbir Singh, who commanded a premier armored division of the Indian Army. Jagat and Jagga, it's a pleasure having you with us today. So, let's begin a little tete-a-tete. I will come straight to the point. Do you feel mechanized operations were conducted well in this war, or could they have been better handled?
Ajay, what we are getting today is only from the Western sources. That is one point. The second is whatever literature is coming out on this war is primarily to do with how Russians have employed the tanks and the other weapon system. As far as Ukraine is concerned, I think it's only about how they are using the anti-tank weapons. So first I'll talk about, how mechanized warfare is fought. Generally, the tanks and the other weapon systems are best utilized in an open terrain. Though, of course, I would say that tanks have proven their mettle even in the semi-urban warfare and urban warfare. We know how tanks were used in Syrian war. Yes. Coming to the present war, I think Russians have not used the tanks tactically well because, it's always a combined arms battle. And in this particular case, I think that particular principle was not followed by the Russians, especially at the tactical level. There were no infantry group as we came to know. When the tanks are moving, they can only be successful if they have with them the infantry, the mechanized infantry, they have the air defense weapon system, they have the air, the artillery in support, and they all have to be trained well to fight together.
Absolutely.
So Russians firstly did not use them in combined arms methodology as we learn and talk.
Right.
Secondly, especially in the initial stages of the battle, especially opposite Kyiv, I would say, I think they were not trained properly, and as the reports have come out, most of them were conscripts or recruits.
Right.
They were not led well. They were just moving on the road. So when you don't use the tanks, the entire gamut of combined arms together, I think they will be failures. And
you have brought out that vital aspect of the tanks being road-bound. But why were they road-bound? Was it wrong timing? After all, the Russians attacked in February when the snow had just begun to melt and the countryside had turned into slush. Martial mud had come in to help the Ukrainians in the same manner in which it helped defeat Napoleon and Hitler. What is the reason behind this faulty tactics?
The timing, that is one part. And even I have read somewhere that Ukrainians had flooded the areas also. So obviously they couldn't move up and I think the mindset when Russians,
And Jagat, what do you feel? Give us an historical perspective. After all, these same areas were the sites of the great tank battles and tank victories when the Germans crossed these sites in May 1941. Where do you think the difference lay?
Ironically, when the tank first came out, it was the first time the tanks came into battle were in 1916, when it came to overcome the trenches which were there existing in World War I. And they were first employed in Somme, and then the large number of the first large tank, employment took place in Cambrai. I think it was a little later, 1917. After that, the centrality of the tank, when it actually, shaped the battlefield, so to say, and was the most dominant weapon as such weapon platform was in World War II. And in World War II, we did see the tanks advancing through this area because,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
Operation Barbarossa, which we've all read about, talked about, studied, the German armor did come through Ukraine. I mean, what was Ukraine? Kharkiv was a major battle area at that time.
Yes.
Kursk was another area which is now in Russia. So they did come through that. And this point, which you raised and which Jagga responded to, we saw tanks lined up one behind the other, what we classically call line ahead
Line
formation,
ahead.
literally.
Yes.
Yeah, one behind the other with hardly any gap, not even about, from the air. Pictures you can make out, the visuals, not even, 50 meters
40
gap
yards from
between
each
one
other.
tank.
I
Yeah,
could see that.
I
Yeah.
mean, totally against, like he rightly said, what we've been taught over our last 40 years. I mean, who advances like that? You go one up, two up, they spread out to such an extent, you move in a combined arms team. And the combined arms team, the concept of the combined arms team, ironically, was written by none other than Mikhail Tukhachevsky, who was a Russian who unfortunately was burned by Stalin just before World War II. But what his writing was picked up by the Germans, picked up, I mean, I'm sure you all read Richardson can race to the swift when he
Swift.
talked a lot of Tukhachevsky's
Yes.
writing. The deep battle operational maneuver groups, all this came out there. And basically what Jagga said, it's a combined arms team. A tank cannot fight alone. It has to
Nice.
be
Yes.
supported by an array of weapons. So be it mechanized infantry, be it your SPRT, be it air defense, be it electronic warfare, be it your matching logistics. I think as we go ahead, a lot of these were missing. Yeah. So
Yes.
In
next
fact,
thing, yeah. And
Okay, if Jagat, I'm going
and one more point, this comes to my mind often as to why Putin, the timing of offensive was decided by Putin. If
yes.
the terrain was so difficult to employ his armor in the manner he wished to employ his armor, why did he
I did
not
not go
delay it?
this
We
year.
have a classic case in point in the Indian context when General Manekshaw
Make
in
sure.
1971 decided against starting the conflict when the monsoons were on. So, I mean, you can correlate that to a degree.
Yes. And another thing that comes out is the fact that so much of the fighting took place inside the cities. Is armor optimally suited to fight in cities? Or is it going to be a norm for which it must be prepared?
Well, today the biggest problem is, for soldiers to fight in the cities. And this is coming out again and again. So you have to be structured to fight in a city in a different manner. And your point is very correct. Do you want to enter a city or do you want to force a city to collapse? So, I mean, why did they go towards Kyiv? Were they going towards Kyiv to capture Kyiv, force the government to collapse, or were they going towards Kyiv to divert troops from the eastern region to, make it easier for them to go in there? There are always 2 points, but the point that you raised about cities is a genuine point, and it is getting, in our own context also, small villages are becoming small towns are becoming middle-sized towns, and the space for maneuver literally is getting reduced day by day, especially in the developed terrain and semi-developed terrain. So, I mean, this is a reality you have to confront.
You see, the time of 1941 was different. Kyiv was not what it is today.
Okay.
That is one part. The second part is that the urbanization is so huge that going around a city like Kyiv, which is divided by a river, the number of troops which Russians would need is tremendous. And if you see the entire forces which were arraigned against Ukraine on the entire border was just 150,000. I think against Kyiv they just sent about 20,000 troops.
Yes, as per reports.
So with that number of troops, I don't think they could have followed 1941. And primarily, like Jagat said, cities have grown huge. Cities have grown huge. So that is the part which we have to understand. Coming to that, should the mechanized forces be prepared for semi-urban and urban warfare? Of course. There's no choice. In our context also, in Europe especially, you have to be ready to fight, I would say, more than a semi-urban urban warfare. we just have to...
Talking about the Battle of Cities brings out one more aspect. The Russians were all set for an attack on Kyiv when the 64-kilometer convoy approaching it inexplicably halted, presumably because of logistics. Do you feel the Battle of Kyiv was a logistic failure, or were there some other issues?
Now, I was just studying, the distance from the Belarus border to Kyiv is just about 100 kilometers.
Yes.
The range of a T-72, the operating range of a T-72 tank is more than 400 kilometers, depending upon the, how old the engine is. So at least I can talk about that in the Battle of Kyiv, where they stopped, the Russians stopped actually 25 to 30 kilometers away from the center. So they had actually traveled not more than 60 to 70 to 80 kilometers and they were on the road. So I don't think in the Battle of Kyiv, if we want to call it so, there was any logistic issues because the tank had enough diesel. In fact, the reports came that the tank troops were demotivated of Russians and they were selling diesel. So if they were selling diesel, where was the problem of logistics? Okay, so in the Battle of Kyiv, I don't think there were issues of logistics. To me, it seems like it was a strategic maneuver by the Russian army because they didn't want the troops, Ukrainian troops, to move from the Battle of Kyiv to the eastern side. And I think Jagga mentioned about it.
Thanks for clearing the air on that pause at Kyiv, which was actually a grand strategic decision and perhaps part of an overall deception plan. Now, let me touch upon another touchy subject, the battle between the tank and the anti-tank weapons. Do you think anti-tank weapons rule the roost now? And what can tanks do to counter it?
You see, Ajay, the battle between two opposite kind of weapon system has always been there. Air Force, the aircraft, the anti-ship missiles.
Yes.
So, similarly, between tanks and anti-tank weapons, it's been happening since the advent of tanks. You take artillery, there's counter-artillery. So this battle will always remain. But like it's always today, yes, with Javelin, with, LAW, with drones. Yes, today it seems that anti-tank weapons have an edge. But on the other side, active protection systems have come in.
Right.
They will get more sophisticated.
Right.
As they get more sophisticated, anti-drone technology is going to come. Counter-drone measures are going to come in much bigger measure. So I think this will carry on.
So even earlier, when the Russians went into Chechnya and the Battle of Gromzy, that led to the development of the arena.
Yes.
When the Israelis went into Lebanon, that led to the development of their, APS system, the trophy. So, I mean, these, like Jagga rightly said, one spurs the advancement in the other. But the other point is they show the tanks having been destroyed, but they don't show what is the impact the tanks have created on that battlefield before they've been destroyed. So there has been an impact that has been created. That's why everybody...
And what do you feel are the implications of the lessons of Ukraine, if I can call it that, on the Indian mechanized battlefield?
I would say that possibly we may lay more stress on combined arms training. I'll just put it that way. Indian Army always trains very hard, but I think one lesson which is coming out is we need to lay more emphasis on combined arms training because you have to train together to fight together.
Right.
So that is one part which is very important. And once at the tactical level you've trained well, the operational and strategic issues will automatically get put things in place.
Yes.
But yes, on the equipment, I think there is a need for us to lay more stress on counter-drone technology.
Okay.
And if I had my way, I would put the active protection system on the top list of acquisition by the mechanized forces, both for BMP as well as for tanks.
You know, in our case, we are equally matched adversaries. So, you know, we have an adversary in the north, we have an adversary on our west.
Right.
Both we fight in different terrain with different equipment, and they, you know, so your matching has to be in three things. You have to be matched as far as your equipment is concerned, you have to be matched as far as your technology is concerned, and you have to be matched as far as your training is concerned. So, you know, and then you have to have your doctrines in place to do that. Unfortunately, in our case, the last time we actually had a peer-to-peer conflict where armor was used in a large measure was in 1971.
Two things that come out very often in the media are those images of the shattered tanks and blasted turrets, leading to speculation of a design flaw in Russian equipment. And of course, talk of the demise of the tank. Could you give us the true perspective on that?
What you said, you know, most analysts have always talked about the demise of the tank. And this prediction has been made earlier, but it's always been proved wrong. So that's the first thing that I'd like to say. Secondly, like Jagga brought out, you know, the Western narrative these days is talking about a design flaw in the T-90 and the T-72. And Washington Post ran an article the other day where they talked about what they call the jack-in-the-box flaw. So
Yes.
where they showed the turret having been separated.
Correct.
And you know, now the issue comes, where do you store the ammunition? Do you store the ammunition outside the tank? You store the ammunition inside the tank. All ammunition is stored inside the tank. Now, where do you store the ammunition inside the tank? Do you store it in the fighting compartment? Do you store it in the hull? Do you store it in the turret? Which is, some of the Western tanks have started storing it in the hull, I mean in the turret, the Abrahams. Now, as far as this design flaw goes, if you see videos of Turkish Leopard 2, which have been used and which have also been struck by ATGMs in their conflict, you also see the separation of the tank turret from the big hull. I've also seen a place where, you know, the Leopard, about 17 rounds are stored in the hull next to the driver's compartment. When that was hit directly, I've seen that hull also, you know, separated from the tank completely. And once a tank is hit and the ammunition goes off, there's very little chance of any crew surviving. You know, nothing you can do. You don't have those minutes to get out. You can't do it. So, I mean, these are all there. Earlier, like...
Ajay, I will not get into design flaw as of now, but this demise of the tank, tanks have been destroyed. So what's so great about it? And if you know, people didn't want tanks, why Ukrainian army is time and again asking for tanks from the NATO nations? Let's not draw wrong lessons from what has happened in this particular war, where Russians did not use the tanks properly. So tank is not going anywhere. Tank is here to stay.
I have to thank General Jagga and General Jagatbir for bringing out the correct perspective of the use of mechanized forces in Ukraine, and more importantly, how it is applicable to the Indian context. As they are brought out, yes, mechanized forces were used widely, but perhaps not optimally. Mechanized forces did get into the battle of built-up areas and cities, but perhaps that is going to be a norm we have to all prepare for. The race of anti-tank weapons and tanks will continue. And at the end of it all, there will be no substitute for training, motivation, and coordination. That will be paramount in the utilization of mechanized forces. On that thought, I leave you with this episode of Armored Operations in Ukraine, and truly hope you would have enjoyed it.